Okay.
Okay.
Holding up under the weirdness. It certainly is weird. Certainly weird. All right, so I'm going to share the article.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
Nope.
There we go.
Ah.
There we go. That's better. All right. So we need a monument to the unknown America, it's called. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. I desperately need a new computer mouse. So hopefully I'm going to get one. Ay, 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 ay. All right, there we go. So Ed Simon is the author, and he is a staff writer at The Millions. I don't know what The Millions is, but his latest book is called Printed in Utopia, The Renaissance's Radicalism. All right, so a memorial makes a statement about who is worth preserving. Why not a sacred and beautiful nothingness? All right, so we'll get started with this. And I guess, though, I guess what I would love is obviously as we go through it, as always, please feel free to interrupt by raising your hand if you have a screen, or for those of you on the phone, I think it's *9 to let me know that you'd like to say something, and also, but I would also love to invite people just to share reflections at the end. So I think when we get to the end of the piece, we'll just have a go around, and anyone who would like to share their thoughts on the topic that, on the piece, on the topic, whatever, people can feel free to contribute whatever thoughts they have. All right. Yeah. Sandy, you want to say something?
Where did you find this article?
This was in the New York Times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. All right. So in Rome's Palatine Museum, built atop the excavation site of Emperor Domitian's palace, and not far from imperial residences of Tiberius and Augustus, there's a curious bit of masonry that was rediscovered in 1820. This artifact is exhibited alongside terracotta heads of Jupiter and marble sculptures of Apollo, all the grand detritus of a lost civilization housed in a former monastery. At the corner of one of the museum's galleries sits this short altar, chiseled from granite that's slightly worn from the elements, and framed with a modest curled design where a statue might sit. No idol is framed by the base. No statue of strong Jupiter or beautiful Apollo sits atop the altar. It is rather simply dedicated to Agnostos Theos, the unknown God. Where the deity would normally be present is rather a sacred and beautiful nothingness. These altars were not uncommon in the ancient Mediterranean. The most famous reference to them is in a homily delivered by the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts, in which he claims that an altar to the unknown God on Areopagus Hill in Athens was actually in honor of Christ. The Athenians, ripe for conversion, Paul thought, had yet to fully understand that. Arguments have been made that the altars honored the undepictable God of the Jews, or that they're a bit of pragmatic hedge betting for any deities who should be worshipped, but that have escaped the attention of the otherwise pious. A sentence I love. Just in case there's a God we didn't know about, here he is. Let's make sure we worship that God as well. Regardless of the exact intent of their makers, the altars to the unknown God present an arresting memorial, a blessing of the blessing of a lacuna, the sacralization of an absence. The altar to the unknown God also provides an opportunity for us to think about memorialization and memory. This has been an iconoclastic summer, literally, right? An iconoclastic summer, as there has been welcome progress in taking down statues dedicated to Confederate generals, as well as the beginning of a more nuanced discussion of figures like the founding fathers. Contrary to the retrograde claim that statues are simply quote-unquote history, a memorial is always an argument, and rarely an ambivalent one. For example, the statue of Augustus of Primo Porta, housed in the Vatican Museum, not far from the Palatine Hill, makes a very specific argument. Almost 7 feet tall, the emperor is represented with an arresting beauty. The breastplate depicting his diplomatic and military victories that resulted in Pax Romana, and symbols associated with Venus and Mars that conflate Augustus with divinity. Augustus of Primo Porta's sculptures made a claim about the sculptor of this image, right? I'm sorry, that there's a few lines in this article that are not quite clear to me. It seems like it didn't get fully edited. The people who sculpted this Augustus made a claim about their subjects, just as the designers of the statues of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jefferson Davis that lined Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, made an argument about their subjects. How we determine who is deserving of honor and think about representation is how we determine who is deserving of honor, and how we think about representation is often complicated by the altar. The Augustus of Primo Porta's argument is about the glory of imperial Rome and the divinity of the emperor. The Confederate memorials of Monument Avenue make an erroneous claim about the righteousness of the lost cause. The altar to the unknown God's claim is different. There's a humility in its design, an ambiguity in its meaning, and even an uncertainty in its subject. The historian Alain de Sasson explains in The Forbidden Image, an intellectual history of iconoclasm, just to make sure everyone knows that the iconoclasm means the destruction of idols. Right? So we often describe the Jewish ancestor Abraham, right, as being an iconoclast, even though he doesn't necessarily destroy any idols in the Bible, depicted doing that in the Bible, but in the Midrashim, there are several Midrashim where he's just described as destroying idols. An intellectual history of iconoclasm, that the tradition of avoiding images of God is born from 2 incoercible facts about our nature. First, that we must look toward the divine. And second, that representing it is futile, sacrilegious, and inconceivable. The sculptures of statues and memorials promise us gods and heroes, but those who created the altar at the Palatine Museum achieved a far greater verisimilitude, much more realistic depiction regarding those subjects. And they did it by depicting nothing. Any statue, be it of Christopher Columbus or Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson or Frederick Douglass, makes a statement about who is worth preserving in bronze. To make a statue of a recognizable subject is to venture something about that subject. But an altar for nothing argues that its subject is so all-encompassing, so universal, so grand that it can't be circumscribed in mere stone. Christian theologians speak of a methodology called apophasis, whereby the divine is discussed in terms of what can't be known about it, where definition is always deferred and thought can't be put into mere words. right? This is in the Jewish context. This is the Maimonidean idea. Maimonides, the medieval Jewish philosopher, right? The idea that you can't say anything in a positive way about God, not positive versus negative, good or bad, but just anything. You can't say anything about God because to say anything about God is essentially to limit what God is. So the only thing you can do is make negative statements about God, like God does not have a body, things like that. So in some ways, the altar to the unknown God is a form of apophatic sculpture, whereby non-existence is a heftier material than steel or bronze. I'd also suggest that the apophatic is precisely the mode in which we should think of our national future. For if God is a lofty subject, then so are freedom, democracy, and America. We are better served in memorializing the contradictory, conflicted, and hypocritical history of this nation, not in monuments, not in monumental equestrian statues punctuating traffic roundabouts, but in a humbler idiom that paradoxically expresses an inherent greatness in all. This is the sentence I really don't understand. An inherent greatness in all the more remarkable a way. This would be nothing new for the United States as a nation. One of the most popular memorials on the National Mall already considers its subject in an apophatic way. When Maya Lin's Vietnam Veterans Memorial was completed in 1982, it was met with great controversy. It is an ascending V-shaped wall of polished granite inscribed with the names of the more than 58,000 Americans who died in the Vietnam War. Lin intended there to be no statues of men atop tanks, no sculptures of brave soldiers traipsing through the jungle. The inclusion against her wishes of just such a depiction at the edge of the memorial speaks to the controversy despite its popularity. Unlike Lincoln's Parthenon or Washington's obelisk, Lin's memorial ventured no argument other than the sheer, unimaginable depth of the war's toll. Abstraction has been used to great effect in other modernist memorials, such as the Oklahoma City National Memorial, the Flight 93 National Memorial in Stoystown, Pennsylvania, and especially the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, where each of the 805 hanging steel rectangles represents an American county where a lynching is known to have taken place. Like the altars to the unknown God, these memorials make their arguments in subtler and ultimately more powerful ways than does a statue of a man astride a horse. They tell us something about language and image and the ways in which some things are so huge that they defy traditional description. Imagine an altar to the unknown America doing something similar, where a potential vision of a country that has yet to exist could be gestured toward in sacred silence, where an expansive understanding of America that mourns its past without mistaking villains for heroes allows for the possibility of redemption. Not in a great mythic past, but in a utopian future that has yet to be lived, but that can be imagined in every individual soul. All right, so I open the floor.
Well,
To any,
I'll bite.
go ahead.
The first thought that occurred to me is the unknown soldier who has this fairly elaborate, militarily guarded tomb. I like the concept, but until somebody like Maya Lin truly designs it, I have trouble conceiving of it.
Yeah, I agree.
As a pacifist, I think the ceremony about the unknown soldier and all that goes into it is absolutely nonsensical.
Well, that's true. Yeah. But
Hiya.
does England, for example, have a memorial to the Battle of Britain anywhere? I don't think
That's a
so.
good question. Joe, do you know the answer to that question?
Are you talking to me?
Mm.
Yeah. Do you know if England has a memorial?
I don't know, but I'd like to comment on what the lady said about nonsensical, about the unknown soldier.
Sandy is my name.
It's Sandy.
What's your name?
Joe,
Sandy.
Joe,
Okay. Well, I don't think it's nonsensical because I'm a veteran of World War II. I lost 3 of my friends in World War II. My grandson fought in Afghanistan and was wounded and has the Purple Heart. He's now in college, thank God, being paid for by the government. I also have the son of a friend of mine who's on the wall in Washington of the 53,000 who were killed in Vietnam. His name is there.
58,000.
Last name is Johnson. I forget his first name. So for me, that the unknown soldier has a meaning. Maybe not to you, but to me.
My husband fought in the Second World War. And so I know a little bit about what I'm speaking. The whole idea of the amount of money and what's going into maintaining this economy of war is the wrong way to go.
Well, that's a different.
Well,
that's a
give it.
different-
How would you spend the money? How would you spend the
On
money?
people who live in the United States who are needy, on education. There are many things that I could spend the money on.
Well, I could never change your mind.
No,
I
you
could never change.
could.
I hear you, but I don't agree with you.
So that's
Thank you.
we're allowed to disagree.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. Naomi,
Right.
what would you like to
Well,
Naomi and then Phil.
Oh, sorry. Is Phyllis ahead of me? That's
No, you can go ahead of me. It's okay. You can go ahead of me.
Two things are occurring to me. I have seen neither of them, but one is Battleship Arizona at Pearl Harbor, and the other is a memorial, I believe, that exists in the city of Berlin, which simply has concrete blocks with people's names on them.
Yeah, the Strauchelsteiner.
Thank you. If
How about the Holocaust Museum in Washington? How about the one in Jerusalem that I visited? I visited both of them. How would you relate? How would you relate to that? Money is being spent on that to maintain it. But look who it's for, our Jewish brothers and sisters. We must never forget about them. That's why we have the museums. So why don't you address that? Is it any different than the memorials that we have in the United States?
Can I say
Can I
something?
talk now or? Okay, I guess not.
let Phyllis talk.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Phyllis, you go.
The way I look at monuments, and I look at them not across a few tens of years, but across the centuries and across the thousands of years, that each group of people, each civilization, puts up monuments that it considers important, valuable. And by you get a sense of what historically these civilizations valued from those monuments. So when it comes to our civilization, we put up what's important, but tearing down what other people put up is just destroying history, and I don't agree with that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a very interesting question. I think what he one second I'm trying my hardest. Boy, this computer does not work at all now. Oh, I apologize. let me just see if I can figure this out.
I'd like for somebody to respond to the Holocaust Museum in
Well, I think
Washington and the one and
Can I say
that's
something?
actually, yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay. Did anybody watch 60 Minutes yesterday?
yes.
Did you see what they're doing with the Holocaust? They're taking individuals that were in the Holocaust and asking them every question they could think of. And then,
Survivors. They're
Right.
asking the survivors.
right, they were people.
They
And
presumably still are.
yeah, people that, so that it could go to classes, it could go anywhere, and people could ask them questions like they're still alive. So that's like a
I went
memorial.
in 1989. I went to Auschwitz, and I saw what was there. In every room that I went to, I said the Kaddish. I'll never forget it. Never forget it.
Yeah, right. I think there's a couple of different questions on the table here. It might be helpful to kind of to distinguish them. The first one, I think, is the question of monuments. Right, a monument is not the same as a museum.
Right.
It's not the same. Right, it's not the same as an archive. And so, for instance, we have in Boston, we have a memorial or a monument to the Holocaust, but it doesn't pretend to be a literal representation of anything in particular, right? It's these sort of gates that you walk through, and the glass is inscribed with people's names, and that's a very different kind of a memorial than, say, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, or the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, which I haven't had a chance to go to yet. And so I don't think this conversation is really about museums. I think it's about monuments. And I agree with Phyllis, right, that cultures put up monuments to what they think are, what they think is important. But I also think that civilizations and societies have to sort of wrestle with what's the meaning of those monuments. Right? It's not, as this author writes, it's not enough just to say, oh, it's history, because at least in the case of many of the Confederate monuments, right, they were not erected until the early 20th century as part of Jim Crow.
Do you think? Do people think that the Confederate monuments should come down, as some of them are?
Yeah, I think that is an open question. I would love to hear people's responses to it, but I think an argument in favor of taking these down is that these are not things that were erected during the Confederate period, right? They were erected after the Confederate period to commemorate, as he says, the lost cause, to enshrine, great traitors to the U.S. As great men of history. I'm still not exactly sure what I think about it, but I'm less swayed than I used to be by the argument that they are history and thus should stay up. Go ahead, Naomi.
Let's think about monuments and museums jointly. It's almost, in my mind, as if museums become the repository of monuments that people have discarded.
Right.
Museums are the.
What was that again? I don't understand that question.
People have neglected, forgotten. I don't know. It's a thought that occurred to me. Maybe.
Well, I think it's very interesting, right? if to speak about the Holocaust again, right? It's one thing, right, to have Nazi propaganda hanging in a Holocaust museum, right? It would be a very different thing to have a Nazi propaganda up on the town square, and so if we think about these monuments, right, as a form of Confederate or white supremacist propaganda, right, we can ask the question: is it appropriate to have them up in the town square, or is it appropriate to have them in a museum where they can be contextualized and understood as a relic of a time that is, I wish it were more in the past than it is. Phyllis, you still have your hand up. Would you like to speak?
No, I don't mean to have it up.
Okay, I'll take it down.
How about the 9/11 exhibit? I mean, there's two. There's a monument and then there's a museum. So there are two things there.
Yes.
I didn't get to the museum because it wasn't done.
Yeah, it's a striking monument with it's sort of a fountain, right? A sort of a reverse fountain. Instead of shooting up into the air, it shoots down into the ground, and it's sort of a series of like waterfalls almost in the shape of one of the towers.
Does anyone disagree that it should not have been built?
What?
What?
The 9/11. The 9/11. The 9/11 monument.
But do people think it shouldn't have been built? I don't
think so.
I don't think anyone would suggest that. I mean, unless I misunderstood. No, I think.
So it's a memorial. So it's a memorial for the people who died in that terrible thing. So what difference? So why not have? So why are some people against the unknown soldier? It's a memory of those. I see a little a closeness there.
Yeah, I can see your point, Joe. Yeah.
I stand by my thought.
Oh, I told you I'd never be able to change them.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's the pomp and circumstance regarding the unknown soldier. That money should go to positive things.
Yeah. Is your husband? Excuse me. Is your husband? Is your husband who served in the war? Is he still alive?
No, he died at 57.
No.
He was
If
an
he were here,
18-year-old when he went into the Navy.
Yeah. If he were alive today, he would agree with me.
I doubt it.
Who knows? It's hard to predict. But I think, though, I mean, it seems to me that the issue here has to do with more than just the memorial in terms of the unknown soldier, right? There's also a kind of a ritual, changing of the guard, and all that kind of stuff.
Excuse me, Rabbi, unknown soldier, singular. There were thousands of unknown soldiers.
Of course.
Of course. So people must understand that. It's not for one person only.
Of course. No, that's why I called it a ritual, right? Because it's symbolic, right? It's not, doesn't actually, the tomb there doesn't actually need to be guarded, right? But it's a symbolic act, right? That we take care of the unknown soldier in a kind of symbolic way because we want to remember all of the people, all of the soldiers who died and were lost, are now lying in places we don't know where they are. So yeah, so I mean, I think so. Anyway, I wanted to bring a poem that share a poem with you that I think is somehow relevant. If I could get my computer to work, it would be great. All right. Yeah, this is just not working. All right. Okay. So let's try this.
Rabbi, you'll have to pardon me. I've got to go.
That sounds good, Joe.
I enjoy your programs, and
Great.
and God bless everybody.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
You
I'll
have
bring the
very
poem out.
interesting points of view, Joe.
Yeah, and I'm going to
Okay.
thank you, Joe. I'm going to bring by the book that I borrowed. I'm going to bring it tomorrow, and I'll bring
Okay,
the
great.
poem I'm about to share. I'll bring it too. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Sounds good, Joe. Okay. Bye bye.
I appreciate it. God bless. Bye-bye.
All right. There we go. All right. I'm sorry. It only took me about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to do that. All right. Let me see if I can do this. Phyllis, go ahead.
Yes, I just thought of something. Would anyone suggest that we tear down the various pyramids in Egypt because they're taking up a lot of land that could be used for other purposes?
I mean, that's a really interesting question, right? And I mean, I think we have. Oh my gosh, I apologize. This is really not working. All right, there we go. Finally, okay. I think that's a really interesting question, right? A related question would be, you know, is somehow the ideology of ancient Egypt, right, somehow pernicious in a way that we shouldn't allow these things to remain
Well,
in
that's exactly my point. It tells us, in a way, what was what people thought or idealized at that time. It doesn't mean we have to idealize it. It doesn't even suggest we do. It suggests that we think about that.
But
Yeah, go ahead, Naomi.
when the Aswan Dam was built, several ancient monuments like
Were destroyed, yes,
were drowned.
I know. Yes, absolutely. But, you know, what can I say? I had no say in that. But, you know, just theoretically, is it an ideal that we should destroy all monuments that do not represent our point of view?
Right. I mean, I guess the question is, should we destroy them, or should we take them down and put them somewhere else? I mean, it really is an interesting. You know, this is a big issue in the Soviet Union, now Russia, right? And
Right,
Yeah.
right, because do we leave up? Were they supposed to leave up Dzerzhinsky? The guy who was the first, the predecessor to the KGB, who was in the Yanka in Moscow, right? He came tumbling down along with a bunch of other, of Soviet worthies. Should we, in naming cities, right? The town I used to go to in Ukraine called Dnipropetrovsk was Ekaterinburg, so named after obviously Catherine.
Yeah. Every 50 years, the cities get new names.
Right, they changed it to Dnipropetrovsk, and now it's Dnipro because they didn't want Petrovsk anymore. Petrovsk was some communist guy, some Revolutionary War or something, and they wanted to get rid of him. So I mean, I think it's really an interesting question. So anyway, but this poem, which you may know, came to mind as we were reading this, especially with Phyllis when you were invoking, Egypt, and and how every culture puts up monuments to what it thinks is important. So it's Ozymandias by Shelley. So let me read it. If you have a screen, you can see it. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which still yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my work, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
Yeah.
So, I guess, right, and then the issue, I think, is specifically with the Confederate monuments, right, is that they become, whether taking them down or not, sometimes the mere discussion about taking them down leads to them becoming sort of rallying points for white supremacists.
Mm.
Right? So that becomes, that becomes a question. In terms of, do we allow this sort of white supremacist narrative to define the visual look of our cities? And I think the question you're asking, Phyllis, is a good one, right? Which is so much of our history smacks of white supremacy. How do we decide? What's the white supremacy we want to get rid of, and what's the white supremacy we're going to tolerate in our history? Jefferson, yes, and Robert E. Lee, no, right? I'm saying that sort of off the cuff, but then but it does. Those questions are there.
In terms of Jefferson, the slave owner, he died bankrupt, and it was a Jewish man who bailed him all out. So it was a lot of talk.
That's true. But again, most of the framers of the Constitution were slave owners, or a great number of them were slave owners. And a great number of early presidents were slave owners. I think the Adams family were the exceptions. I don't think either John or John Quincy owned slaves.
Right.
But when you look at, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, even did Andrew Jackson, he may have, I don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah, Gene, you've been quiet. Would you like to share your thoughts?
I'll share one thought, then I have to go. I think it's really important to distinguish between what we put on public land and what's erected on private land. And Drew Faust, the former president of Harvard, did a wonderful book about cemeteries and how cemeteries after the Civil War tell us so much about the lost cause and our memories of that war. And I think when we put monuments of Confederate generals on public land, I think that's really offensive to our general shared values. But I think monuments to Confederate generals in cemeteries that are put on private land by private money, by their families, that's the way they can be memorialized without the rest of us having to celebrate them. So that's what I have to say.
Very, very interesting.
Very well said.
Thank you. I've got to go now, but this has been really interesting. So thank you all very much.
You're welcome, Gene. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, that is an interesting distinction.
Yeah. Yeah.
But-
So yeah, go ahead, Naomi. Yeah.
Well, what I'm thinking of is the various civil rights laws which affected private and public accommodations.
Right.
But dead people is different.
Well, right. And I mean, and also, I mean, I think that, you know, this gets very funky, right? About who can be buried in what cemetery.
Yeah.
Right. It's, you know, a Jewish cemetery is defined as a piece of land where Jews are buried, right? And
Only
many-
Jews.
right, that's what I'm saying, only Jews. And so many
Mhm.
Jewish cemeteries now have you know, have a kind of an adjoining area where non-Jewish family members can be buried, or where, you know, a Jew and a non-Jew can be buried together. And, you know, the sort of the Jewish legal aspects of that are complicated, I think. So it is a very interesting question. And again, I really do think, right, that the two, those two distinctions are very helpful, right? The private public distinction, right?
Very
Because this would suggest not just cemeteries, but also sculpture parks, right? You know, I guess there's a tradition somewhere, was it India, where statues from, you know, some old regime they're taken to this place and just left there to, you know, and they're not maintained. And so that would be one thing, you know, make a museum out of it, right? And the other question, you know, the other possibility, of course, is, you know, the well-known use of public land to erect things that other people might find offensive. And so the one I remember is that there's a huge and giant cross on a mountain near, I think it's near Waterbury, Connecticut. It was always a landmark, you know, when we were driving home from someplace or other. Whenever we saw the cross, we knew that we were like half an hour from home or something. But that, of course, was on private land, and, you know, wouldn't be possible if it were on public land. And then the distinction that we made earlier, right? The distinction between a public monument out in the city, or, you know, in a public area, versus a monument that sits in a museum, right, next to other monuments. It's not lost on me that this author begins his essay by talking about three monuments that are next to one another in a museum, right? The one to Jupiter, the one to Apollo, and the one to this Kostos Theos, right? That they all sit together, and which has the effect, right, of demonstrating how powerful the empty altar is.
Yeah.
You know, and that somehow for him evokes all these modernists. I mean, Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial is so incredibly powerful. You know, without any explicit imagery from the war. And I'm familiar with her work also. She made a monument to the women of Yale in front of Sterling Library that went up when I was a graduate student there. And that's also very powerful image. The same kind of design with black marble.
But okay, we light a menorah on the Boston Common. We put creches in front of city halls. And where do we elide here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've never been a big fan of the the municipal Hanukkah menorah lighting. That tends to be done by the Chabad folks.
Yeah.
It is by the
and-
Chabad.
It is. the
Yeah.
Chabad.
Yeah, and most of the liberal rabbis I know are not so thrilled
Yeah.
about that.
But we also light every tree, or if it's a good year and we have the money, we light a lot of trees on the Boston Common for Christmas.
Right.
Although I suppose you could be pagan and say it's the return of the lights.
I mean, I think that's the spirit in which I tend to take Christmas lights, is that they are equivalent in that way to Hanukkah lights. It's a way of taking this very important. I guess you could call it pagan, but I think it's even more than that. I think it's deeply human need to sort of assert remind ourselves of the truth, right? That we've hit the darkest days of the year, and things will light up again. And so, so many traditions have this, that it's, I think I can see it as, sufficiently universal to be secularized. But yeah, I mean, it's, but those are interesting because they tend to be fleeting, right? Those are not monuments that stay.
That's true. Yeah.
But they're lights that are there for the season, and then they disappear again. And so, and also, I don't know if they are. I mean, interesting question, right? What are they? But yeah, I mean, I find this topic to be very elusive in some ways, very difficult to.
Well, it keeps ramifying the more you think about it.
Yeah.
The thing is that non-Jews think that everybody celebrates Christmas, and it's a holiday. It's a general holiday. It's a national holiday. And
Right.
so, I mean,
Right, and I think with the exception of, I mean, there obviously there's other holiday, other religions don't necessarily celebrate Christmas, but many of the Hindus I know celebrate Christmas, and many of the Muslims I do. Muslims I know will also, because Jesus is a prophet and this is Jesus' birthday, and so let's have fun, and everyone else is doing it, so let's So I think the Jews tend to be a little bit more sensitive about these things than a lot of other religious minorities in this country.
The Hindus have their own celebration. It's called
Yeah.
Diwali.
Diwali. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, but because Hinduism has a lot of different gods, it's not hard for them to absorb.
and another
Christmas.
one.
But anyway, all right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Very, very
Thank
interesting
you.
conversation. And
Yes,
I will, Phyllis, I'll call you again tonight for the
Super. Okay.
for the.
Good enough.
Oh,
Bye.
sounds good. Talk to you
Okay.
soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you again.
Yep.
Trying to get out of here.
Almost impossible.